Hey, this is Madalyn
and Suze Cooper, and you're listening to All Things Audio.
We got some interesting news that have come across our desk in the past few weeks, and we have a special interview today with Yousef Ali from Blast. Some of you may remember a few weeks ago we talked about this interesting app called Blast Radio, and Suze invited him to come on. Suze, you were so smart doing that. Thank you.
Well, it just seemed like the natural thing to do. We were talking a lot around it. We had a lot of questions. We were really interested in the whole way that this app is kind of using monetization and the different products that are linked to this app. It's really interesting. If you haven't listened to the episode where we talked about that, it is the one from 2 weeks ago. But I'm sure we're going to cover absolutely all of that and more later on when we bring Yousef up to speak. So really excited about chatting to you today.
Definitely. Now, our first piece of news that we've come across is, Sue, something that is quite exciting. Legion posted a tweet recently talking about being able to speak in Twitter Spaces via desktop. And I'm sure some of you remember that prior to Elon purchasing Twitter, this feature was in the works. Do you remember that, Suze? They had announced it in one of their Q&A sessions, the Spaces team, that was I think going to be next up to launch. We sure were.
Yeah, we were on the brink. We were on the brink of waiting for this to go live, weren't we? Desktop was next on the roadmap. We were absolutely sure that we were going to be able to speak live into Spaces on desktop. We've been able to just listen and send reactions and things within Spaces for quite a while on Twitter on desktop. But this was all about speaking into the space. And, you know, for those of you who've tried out LinkedIn audio events, we'd all kind of agreed that there's sort of an added dimension to being able to speak using the desktop. And we're all quite excited about that happening. So, this is really great to see. Legion mentions here in this tweet that there seems to be a 10-second delay. I mean, that's something that we've found anyway, isn't it, Madalyn, with the desktop version versus the mobile version. I know at the end of our space each week, I can still hear on the recording that you send over to me, we can still hear it playing out, even though we've closed the space because you've got it up on your desktop.
Right. I always have it on my desktop. And you're right, because we have a podcast version, in case some of our listeners don't know this, we are recording this right now individually, like locally with our gear. So we have a nice clean copy for the podcast version that will come out later in the week. And I like to have my desktop right in front of me with Spaces. I have it muted, but then I have, the mobile right here in front of me as well. And what I do is when Suze closes the space and it's done, then I unmute my desktop because I like to hear, how it's sounding. And there's always at least a 10-second delay. There's always that delay. So that news didn't surprise me. But then also I noticed in this particular tweet, I was looking at the comments and I saw there was one from Miley, and she's a real popular Spaces host. She's all about social audio. And she said, I think she was confusing the delay because she said the delay was between speaker and audience has already existed. And so that's two completely separate things. When you are listening on mobile here or desktop, there's a delay between the listener mode and the host and co-host mode in speaker mode. And I was in one of the very early Spaces when Twitter was testing it before they even had the beta host, and they were doing a test. I happened to just randomly see it was, I saw the Fleets bar with this weird purple bubble, and I went in there and they were talking about this delay, and it was just the way the system was set up. It was I think 2 different servers or something between the speakers and the listeners. So there's always been the delay between those two. You may notice when you hit the mic and you come up here to speak, it takes a second, and then all of a sudden we're further along in the conversation than what you were already hearing. So that's that delay.
That's right. I mean, I think we worked out it's two separate streams, isn't it? And I think one of the other things that we've spoken about as well when we've talked about, how to be a host in a space is that when you're bringing someone up, remembering that actually they miss a section as they're connecting, and that what you can do as the host is just reiterate, once you know that they've got the mic, reiterate what's just been said so that they're caught up before they then dive in with whatever it is they're about to say. Because, there just is that split second gap that people are going to miss as they're moving from the listener stream into the sort of stage stream, if you like. Yeah.
And I think the exciting news about now seeing that Twitter is working on developing the desktop version for us to speak in is that for those of us that take audio more serious than the casual Spaces host, that we have all the gear, we've been chomping at the bit for years wanting to be able to broadcast through desktop. I remember when I first became a beta host, one of the staffers DM'd me and said, give me a laundry list of all the things you would love to have. That was probably my top one. I was like, I would like to be able to speak and broadcast through desktop. That would be my number one thing to do, because as a podcaster, I want to get the best possible audio using all my gear. And it's taken me quite a while to finally get all the right gear that allows me to do it through my iPhone, which is what I'm doing right now, thanks to George Silverman, who had advised me about the Zoom PodTrack P4, because I just did not want to invest in that Rodecaster 2. And actually now, looking back, I'm glad I waited, because I guess we'll save this maybe for next week, Suze. But I'm doing a lot of research on that Rodecaster Duo that just came out.
Oh, doesn't it look nice?
It does look nice. It's smaller. That was one of my biggest concerns with the Rodecaster 2, is it's so darn big and takes up so much space. So George, for those of y'all that knew George Silverman, unfortunately he passed away last month, but he was a regular in this space, and he co-hosted some of my other spaces, and he always sounded so great on audio. And I had asked him, like, what gear are you using? Because I just was not going to invest in the Rodecaster. I had other gear, but it did not allow me to use my Shure SM7B microphone that I use for podcasting through my iPhone in spaces. So he finally made a little video walking me through his setup with this Zoom PodTrack P4, which is actually not terribly expensive. It's $150. And then he uses the Bluetooth adapter. That's another $50. So for $200, I have a really nice setup. It allows me to record as well for the podcast version. And I've been really happy with this. But it just goes back to this piece of news. I want to be able to just go right through my computer with my podcast gear and not have to have all these extra pieces of hardware. I mean, won't that be nice, Suze?
Yeah, I think, it just does open up that possibility for people, and does make it kind of slightly easier just to get connected and get online and sound good if that's what they're after doing. So yeah, it's just a really, one of those things that we expected to happen, that, not being developers or knowing exactly what's involved in making that happen, it felt like it was an obvious thing to try and do. And it definitely was. I mean, looking at the other tweets that are attached to this one from Legion that he tweeted out earlier this week, they're dated 2021. So, we're talking like a couple of years back now, when we were on the brink and feeling like this was going to be about to happen, which is quite remarkable, really, when you think of it. I don't know, time just really does fly, doesn't it? So, yeah, it's good to see that they're picking stuff up. Again, it's also good to understand that Spaces is having a bit of maintenance, a bit of an upgrade. Someone somewhere is thinking about Spaces, despite there being a very limited team potentially working on Spaces nowadays. So it's just nice to see some news coming through that relates directly to the feature that we all enjoy so much.
And I think this is going to encourage the more casual host, Spaces host, that probably has a decent microphone. Maybe they have the inexpensive Audio-Technica ATR 2100 they use in their live streams, and it's a great microphone. It's only $80. And I can tell you, it sounds just as good as the super expensive mics. I've done a podcast before with a co-host. I had my Howell PR40, which was a over $300 microphone. She had the Audio-Technica ATR 2100. is much more inexpensive, $79. It's quite a deal. And you cannot tell the difference with our audio. I thought we sounded exactly the same as far as the quality of the audio. So I'm sure some of these hosts have a decent mic that they can easily use through their computer that maybe now with desktop, or at least when it does come out with desktop hosting, that they'll use some better gear instead of talking just directly through their iPhone with AirPods or the earbuds, or some people just do it through speakerphone while they're in spaces. So I think the audio is going to get better through this process. That's what I hope.
Well, wait and see what people do with it. That's always what we say, isn't it? But it's true. So this next tweet then that you've come across, Madalyn, from Twitter Daily News at Titter Daily, this is all about the ability to play Twitter videos in the background of other apps or when your phone screen is locked. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting because they also mentioned in this tweet that this is going to be great for the growing number of podcasts that are now live streaming on Twitter. We've been hearing a lot about that in the news recently. We've been reporting on it. So I found this to be quite interesting. So if you are live streaming your podcast and you're making sure it also goes out to, if you're using something like StreamYard, like I do, Twitter is one of the options. So I thought this was actually really great news to hear. Now, with me on my iPhone, I don't know if Android does this, but on my iPhone, I can do this when listening to Spaces. So that works. It'll be interesting to try this with the live streams on Twitter. But if you're listening, like right now, we're live in Spaces. So if you're on your phone, you're listening and you want to lock your screen. There are many times where I'm listening to a live space and I want to lock the screen because I'm out walking my dog, but I still want to tune in. Most times it works okay, but sometimes it doesn't. Like as soon as I lock my screen, it'll stop playing. Has that happened to you, Suze, where it just stops?
Yeah, and either you then open up the screen again and it's shut the app and it's just jumped you out completely, or it's still playing but the app is actually frozen. I've had that as well, so I then have to close the app completely. So there's obviously something that's not working like it should do.
Yeah, it doesn't happen every time, but many times it will. Like there'll be a space later that I'm going to be listening to live, and many times I'll be trying to do something else while I'm listening. So I just lock my screen, put it in my pocket, walk around, do whatever. And it's not every time, but many times it just stops. I'm like, oh no. So I actually have to go back in, tap on leave the space, and then open it back up. And that fixes it every time. So hopefully they'll fix that bug while they're in the process of setting up this new feature for live streams. I would imagine it's a quite similar thing they're doing here, right?
Yeah, I would think so. But yeah, it would be good if it worked seamlessly before they roll it out. But then we know Twitter, don't we?
We do know Twitter. We know it a little too well.
Let's move on and talk about Instagram. So this is a tweet from our reverse engineer pal Alessandro Paluzzi, who we still haven't invited on the show, and we really should because we've spoken about him so often over the last 97 episodes. He said Instagram's working on the ability to create audio notes. Interesting.
That sounds really cool. I'm not on Instagram nearly as much as I am on Twitter, but I love that ability to use audio. And many of you know I've been battling some really horrific wrist issues for months now, my right wrist. So it's making it harder for me to do things on the computer. So I'm really turning to more audio types of things because it's just less work on my hand. And I'm just all for it. I love the audio DMs. I'm all over that. I love it. It is so nice and easy to do. So I'm finding this quite interesting. Is this more like a DM kind of? I mean, the screenshot, I'm trying to understand exactly. It says share with close friends. It looks like there's a pull down with options. So is this separate from just a private message thing where it sounds like we can actually share an audio note with a group of friends or just to all of our followers? Could you tell from looking at this?
Now, I think from where that says shared with close friends, that reminds me very much of the feature that they've got on there where you can share a story just with a close group of friends. You don't have to share a story to everybody that's following on there. So potentially it's linking into that and allowing you to create an audio message or an audio story potentially that you would then only send to a select group of people. A little bit like they've tried out with circles over here on Twitter, I suppose. But I mean, what really fascinates me is, Instagram is purely a visual, always has been a visual platform, right? I mean, okay, so they've gone from static visual to reels and video and all the rest of it. But once again, it's another app that's kind of bolting on audio because everybody's using audio. And it's just interesting to see what they do with that. Like, as a visual first app, does this just kind of plug in somewhere underneath, or is it going to become something more than that? Are they going to use some generative AI over there to create some visuals to go with your audio, or is that the sort of thing that we're waiting to see? Even over on TikTok, you kind of think, well, they've got a very there's an audio strand to what they do. There's artists that are discovered over their music that you've not heard before that's suddenly everywhere because it's been on TikTok. There is at least a kind of element of audio to it, but certainly for Instagram, other than selecting some pre-selected music to add to your video to put on the background, it's not an instant thought that Instagram is there for audio. So interesting that they're thinking about adding on this audio notes, very much asynchronous type communication again. Just an interesting one to watch. Again, all this watching.
Always looking out for all the audio things. I am so excited. We have a special guest here with us, Suze. Would you like to do, since you're lined this all up for us today, I'm going to let you do all the proper introductions.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to say thank you to Yousef for joining us at the very start of the space. Yousef is the founder and CEO of Blast Radio, which is a new type of social audio app, which me and Madalyn were discussing a couple of weeks ago. We actually came across a article that was on Gizmodo quite randomly. It just popped up on one of my Google alerts because I was looking for things on social audio. And as we read through it and chatted to each other about it, we realised that actually this is a social audio platform with a very different outlook, very much leaning into kind of the music area rather than dialogue and chatting, but also selling products to their creators. So we want to hear loads more about it. Yousef Ali, welcome to the All Things Audio space. Thank you very much for being patient while we got to you.
Well, Suze and Madalyn, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for all the kind words about what we're doing with Blast.
Well, it just sounds so different. Can you explain to us, first of all, give everyone kind of an overview of what Blast Radio is?
Blast Radio is very it's a very simple concept. It's user-generated radio, but when I say radio, I mean and I mean internet radio. Obviously, we're not talking about broadcasting off of towers, but it's a user-generated radio platform, which means that it has all the fidelity that you would expect from anywhere from Sirius XM or FM transmitting, whatever. And the whole thing is that it's really hard to make that kind of high quality audio. Anyone who was listening in the very beginning can attest to how hard it is to make something listenable. So in order to do that, we made these devices that make it as simple as one button for just anyone to be able to broadcast at that high fidelity.
So effectively, you've got a variety of different products, haven't you? There's a microphone, there's something called a blast box, is that right? Can you talk us through these different products that you've got and what effectively the creator needs to purchase one of these in order to be able to broadcast on Blast, right?
Well, okay, so we have 3 ways for you to be able to broadcast on Blast, 2 of which are hardware and 1 is software. So just to be clear to anyone listening, it's any one of these. You don't need multiple products. You just need one product. So so the idea is we have one product, which is an all-in-one broadcast studio, which is it has a stereo pair microphone. It's got 3 inputs and 2 outputs. Of the 3 inputs, to be specific, 1 is a line level input, and then there's 2 microphone inputs, and then 2 headphone outputs. The whole thing is, super easy to use. It's like a 1-button experience, and it's really designed to be sort of like an iPod for broadcasting. It just somebody who knows nothing about audio should be able to get up and broadcasting within 5 minutes. And that was the sort of the idea behind this business. We have a second product that's geared a little bit more towards like your novice person who may not want to be, using a computer for any reason. Maybe it's a lot of times it's DJs or musicians. And it's basically a similar product, except for it just has one RCA input and one quarter-inch output for headphones. And then there's a third product, which is, I guess, a little bit more professional, where we have DAW plugins where you can, drop this plugin into your Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton, whatever DAW you prefer to use, and it'll broadcast your master channel with one button. Now, another thing to note about this is that it's all broadcast into the Blast Radio platform, where there's a number of social features. People can follow you. It's similar to Twitch. Except for there's sort of everything is live and up to 24 hours, and then it sort of expires, similar to an Instagram story. The cool thing about that is you can accumulate followers, and then whenever you go live and you press that button on any of our products, your followers get a push notification. So that saves you the trouble of having to constantly market your broadcasts every time you want to get live. The real magic trick with this whole suite of products is the streaming technology. All of our products, especially which is especially special for the fact that these hardware products are doing this, are broadcasting losslessly to the cloud. So you're getting 48 kilohertz lossless streams to the cloud. Now, to the listener, obviously, to not kill everyone's bandwidth, it's encoded in the best available to their bandwidth. So you're not doing lossless downstream to the listener, but they're getting a very high quality stream because what came in was lossless. But the most important thing about this is, as a broadcaster, you're getting left with a WAV file that you can download whenever you want, put it into whatever your audio editor is, and repurpose for however you want to repurpose it. So maybe this is maybe you're live broadcasting your podcast taping, and then taking that file later and then putting that up somewhere else. We're going to be building out integrations over time to allow you to push that file into all sorts of places, and maybe even some editing tools over time. But the main thing here is the fact that you're able to have this super easy one button experience for capturing lossless audio, and you don't have to know anything about audio, is kind of like the magic trick here.
One of the questions that Madalyn actually was wondering when we spoke about this before was around whether or not the products work outside of the Blast Radio app, or whether they're just connecting to the Blast cloud kind of thing.
They just connect to Blast right now. Now, I mean, look, over time we're exploring partnerships, we're talking to people, but I mean the real story is where can you broadcast in this high fidelity right now? And that's kind of the key issue here. I mean, we're on Twitter Spaces, and I'm a big fan of Twitter Spaces, and I've had some friends over the years who have been on the team, and I'm very supportive of what's happening on Twitter Spaces, and also similar products like Clubhouse, etc. Which is a really great product for a certain type of use case. However, we're listening to a Twitter Space that's going anywhere between 3 kilohertz to 16 kilohertz. And not to get super technical, but in terms of the sample rate here, because I don't know, how technical the audience might be, but just to put it in perspective, a cassette is in 20 something kilohertz. What you're listening to on a CD is 44.1 kilohertz. So Blast broadcasts at 48 kilohertz, which is above CD quality. So, there's not it's a completely different technology. What we're using right now is to broadcast on this space or to talk on this space is VoIP. So it's varying between 3 kilohertz to 16 kilohertz, depending on bandwidth fluctuations, etc. So it's not really great for audio quality. And it's kind of no matter how good your microphone is, and don't get me wrong, it will make a difference depending on how good your microphone is, as we heard in the very beginning as you were trying to get your Rodecaster working. It will make your microphone does make a difference, but it will only make so much of a difference because at the end of the day, it's going to be downgraded to that sample rate, and that sample rate will determine the resolution in which the audio is.
Yeah, and these were all the conversations we were having. So if like 2 years ago, when me and Madalyn were just trying to work out how we could sound just a little bit better via the transport stream, and in fact, the reason that we're really kind of connected and using the microphones is because we do repurpose our audio, which is what you just spoke about there, so that the podcast version of it is actually the local version, which is the higher quality. But equally, we want to go straight into the space using the same equipment. So that took an awful lot of trying to figure out and work out what the easiest way to do that was. I mean, over a good few months and a good few heads being put together in a good few spaces, Madalyn, right? It's the reason, we met Michael along the way, we met George, we met all sorts of different people, all trying out different gadgets, different things, iRigs that wouldn't work, and, what was sending audio wasn't receiving audio, and all these different things. It was a great time for trying to figure it out as a community, and that's where all things audio kind of came from, because we were all trying different things. So certainly to hear that something like Blast Radio has been set up with the creator in mind, with all of those questions and queries and things that we came across, that we were determined to find out the answer, but other people might not have been. And, we set this up so we could let people know what we'd learned and what we'd figured out. But to create the actual app and to provide, a one-button solution to being able to plug this in, press the button, and it will work. I think there was a point where we might have done just about anything for that, right, Madalyn?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that. It's like, this is exactly my thought, is that, if you count the steps that go into let's just say, this is where sort of a lot of the logic behind this business began, was that if you really take into account like all the steps that somebody who literally just doesn't know anything about audio, somebody who's coming in completely cold and just, feels that they have something to say or something they want to express, maybe even a musician, and what it would take from them to go from audio on their, some sort of content produced on their end, and somebody listening live on the other end, or not even live, just listening, period. Let's just say it's a podcast, it's asynchronous. If you count those steps, it can be upwards of 15 to 20 steps, is what we counted. And we're not talking about steps just click on this button and click on that button. We're talking about, going to various stores, points of research, spending, maybe hundreds of dollars, minimum like $100-something, as you all know, and then not to mention taking various pieces of software and getting them all to work together, and then using various marketing platforms, et cetera, et cetera. And so we said, can we condense that to one button? And that was sort of what we were trying to do, is just trying to make this super simple and fun, and also the other side of it is this is where the format innovation idea of live plus up to 24 hours. The shelf life of it being up to 24 hours is frankly only really possible because of the fact that the quality is good enough that you could tune into it asynchronously and not feel right now, I don't know that a lot of people are listening to Twitter Spaces after the fact. Hence, you guys are doing recordings, and then taking it into editors later, et cetera, and doing and recording your own local versions. But because of the audio quality, it enables us to have that extra shelf life for any given broadcast. But we have it expire after 24 hours because we also want to create this psychological safety for the broadcasters on our platform to feel comfortable being unfiltered, unpolished, experimental, et cetera, which is especially critical for musicians, but also for pundits and whatnot, because not everybody wants everything to be permanent. So you have the chance to you do your broadcast, and then we see a lot of people who, especially who are doing more talk-driven ones, take it and then publish it afterwards, to other platforms.
So Blast Radio is really, as you've described there, it's like a radio feed as opposed to like a conversational platform like this, where you would talk to the people who are listening or have the opportunity to do that. So I guess in terms of in the social audio app world, it's kind of more akin to what Amazon were trying to do with Amazon Amp than it is to, say, Spaces or Clubhouse or one of those. That's right, yeah?
Yeah, look, we're exploring some forms of call-in features, etc. And but to us, the litmus test is it needs to be, this is audio quality first. So the most important thing here is if you can't listen to this for hours at a time in your car, in the same way that you would listen to Sirius XM, then it's not a feature we want to engage with. And so that's like the main thing that we're focused on. I think that, Twitter Spaces, for example, and Clubhouse does an incredible job. Like these types of companies with the sort of the call, like the VoIP infrastructure, they do a really great job for a certain type of listening. But if you think about listening from sort of two main buckets, lean in and lean back, right? Lean in listening is really important for informational stuff, right? If I'm like leaning in because I want to hear about that really hot stock tip or what's happening in my industry, I'm willing to forgo a certain level of quality of the audio because the relevance to me is super important that I'm willing to pay attention, right? If you even generalize further than that, it's like phone calls are a perfect example of this. Nobody loves the audio quality of a phone call. Nobody's like putting on a phone call for fun, but you need to hear what the other person has to tell you, right? Like whether you're meeting up for something or whatever, it's business. Lean back listening is really the bulk of listening hours if you think about it. It's when you get into an Uber and there's like a radio playing. I live in New York, so I'm obviously like not somebody who drives very much. But like you get into an Uber and someone's got the like FM dial going and it's just like ambient. What you play in the background while you're working, what you keep on in your home while you're having dinner. That sort of lean back experience really does need it necessitates high audio quality, and that's what we think we really nailed. And we wanted to create a platform for people who want to present to that real estate of attention. And so naturally, we've done pretty well with musicians because musicians, arguably are making music for that exact form of real estate. And then the type of people who do talk, the talk tends to be a little bit more entertainment focused as opposed to as informational.
Yeah, I had a dig around on the app over the last week or so, and there's definitely a higher percentage of music content over there. I couldn't find any speech at all, so I obviously need to jump back in and try and find some people over there. But yeah, you talking about having the plug-in for Doors. I mean, it feels like musicians is a real core audience for Blast Radio at the moment.
Well, part of the thought here is also like, look, if you think about audio as a really big world, right? You're talking about a world where, there's just so much listening attention or listening real estate. It's almost as much as the entire visual real estate when you're talking about attention, right? And when you think of it from that perspective, you have to think from well, what's the ultimate user that you need to start with? And to us, we're like, if it's good enough for musicians, then it'll be good enough for everybody. We could always add other interactive features, etc. But if it's from a core perspective, like it's not good enough to present music on, well, then it's probably not going to be good enough for the rest.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, the other thing that we discuss with pretty much every platform that we've spoken about, Madalyn, is we always come back to like monetization for the creators, and lots of creators will ask, is there a way of monetizing my content if I'm putting it out there? We've had variations over here on Twitter of tip jar and, being on waiting lists forever to be able to get super follows and all those kind of things. What's kind of Blast Radio's format in terms of monetization for the creators over there? Or is there one at the moment?
We have one on there that's like we have a feature called fan mail. So to give a little bit of context, because for those who haven't played with Blast Radio yet, Blast Radio, as I said, it's really designed to be a lean back experience. It's also supposed to be something that's like not overwhelming for listeners. If you're a listener, we had this concept called Open and Go, which is to sort of mirror the experience of like listening to normal radio. You open it up, you're not overwhelmed by the content. You just click on something, you start listening, and then you put it in your pocket. We don't want you playing around in the app too much. if you're playing around the app too much, our thesis is that eventually you'll end up on TikTok, or Instagram, or any one of these multi-trillion, like billion-dollar, trillion-dollar companies that have, like, figured out how to, juice every second of your visual attention, right? So, as a result, we also don't have we don't have a chat experience. We don't have a commenting experience. And also part of that is to, create a space where it's safe for these creators to feel comfortable, being unfiltered and vulnerable. I think audio is a uniquely vulnerable medium. So we wanted to make sure that that creators felt very comfortable between the ephemerality, the audio quality, and the one button experience, being able to experiment and be free with what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're performing, especially when it comes to musicians. Now that said, we realized over time, okay, the most important thing, they do want to hear something from their audience, but we don't want trolls. So what we did was we coupled tipping with messaging, where you're allowed to send essentially one short message to the creator along with a tip, and then the creator takes a percentage of the tip, a good percentage of the tip, actually. So that's the only monetization right now, and that's, to us, like, we were like, that's the minimum viable form of monetization. What we didn't want to do was start with like an elaborate monetization scheme and then have people come on there thinking they're going to make a lot of money. Most people are not business people. They'll go in there, start something, see that they're not making money immediately, because that's how any business works, and then give up on the whole thing because they thought they were going to get rich. Frankly, at the people use Blast Radio not because they're going to make a lot of money. They do it because they enjoy it and it's fun, and they love creating the content, and they want to be heard, right? Now over time, we'll continue to watch how people are behaving, and we'll tailor experiences so that way they can capture the value that they're creating on the platform.
I have a quick question. So, who else besides musicians do you think would gravitate to this app to use it, for their voice?
That's a good question. I don't really know. I have my theories, and and I've seen all sorts of people. We've seen everything from pastors to, actually today there was like an art critic talking very theoretically about or cultural ecology, as he was describing it. That's available, I guess, for the next 24 hours if you want to tune in. But we have a guy who calls sports games. There's all sorts of people. I think what we've seen has been the most successful has been like a combination of talk and music. And they're like the people who really do the best on our platform seem to talk a little bit, play some music, and they cultivate a relation, a community around that, which frankly, is what we've seen forever in radio, right? And so they're basically mimicking some form of radio, but instead of it being very corporate and very sterile, it's very raw and very personal and intimate, because it's just a person. It's not a corporate entity, et cetera, et cetera.
So very much like Amazon Amp, right? Where people are playing music and almost like they're kind of part DJ, part talk show host, sharing their thoughts and things.
Yeah, and look, I think Amazon Amp, I really appreciate that Amazon Amp is doing what they're doing, because I think that's logically where people. This is where I think we see people, gravitating towards, and we see what listeners are enjoying, and there's a lot of passion around it. The one thing I'd say again about AMP is that they're using VoIP technology again. So the voice is not like the voice part of it, which is a really critical part, is not coming through in the greatest quality. And, it's really hard to tell someone to listen to, remember we talked about lean in and lean back, like lean in versus lean back. I don't know that I want to keep have a conference call going on in my car, for fun, you know what I mean? And so I think that's a really big thing. And drive time is critical. If you're not solving for drive time, you're not really solving for much. And so a good percentage of our listeners are listening to this stuff, obviously on your AirPods, but also in their car, on their commutes, etc. And that's kind of the one place where you can't watch TikTok.
I'm really interested, Yousef, in kind of your background. Are you a developer? Are you an audio engineer? What's kind of your background? How have you found yourself being Blast Radio?
Well, I'm like, first of all, a lifelong musician. I've been playing music since I was 4. I wouldn't say I'm great at it, otherwise I'd probably be doing that more professionally. But I've been a lifelong musician and audio geek. I've owned a lot of audio gear over the years and spent an irresponsible amount of money on it. And So that's one thing that colors my perspective. But the other part of it is also I've been in sort of the startup world and in sort of the traditional media world for some time. I started off my career working in television with Black Entertainment Television and Viacom doing digital strategy work. So when we were starting Blast, the very obvious thing to me was, hey, the next big thing that hasn't really been solved in new media is audio. Audio is still, people don't realize radio, like AM, FM radio, is still king of all attention and reach. It's so ever present. It's almost like trying to describe water to a fish. It has greater reach than television and even all of social media combined.
Yeah, I mean, me and Madalyn have been utterly convinced of audio's supremacy for quite some time now, haven't we?
Yeah, and the thing is that it was really funny is that like people don't, when I would try to explain this to people, that like 55% of all like American listening hours is still AM FM, and like all of streaming is like 5%. I mean, they thought I was crazy because a lot of people are coastal elites who are have this sort of trajectory of growing up listening to it's like growing up listening to like iPods and whatever, and they were like, there was like radio was a thing that they did when they were like 5 or 10 that was going on in their mom's car, and then they gave up on it, and then they moved from an iPod to an iPhone and to like Spotify and whatever else, and just AM FM was a thing of the past. I'm like, no, 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 it never went anywhere. You just went somewhere, and that's kind of like that's the difference.
That's a great point. And I'm not surprised you're a musician. It's like I used to be in the music business, and musicians are all about quality audio. So I think that's probably really in your favor with developing this tool.
Well, it's funny you say that, in that like I spent a lot. I mean, in researching this, doing the R&D for this, we spent a lot of time in the hi-fi world, and it's really a fine line. You don't want to end up in the hi-fi world because that's a very specific, very small industry, right? And one thing you learn in the hi-fi world is that nobody, like, I mean, consumers don't care about quality on some level, right? But they do care about quality. So it's a weird thing because like you can't sell a consumer on quality, but at the same time quality will could be the thing that kills you, especially when it comes to audio, right? But the main thing is that when you like, if somebody comes in and starts listening to a Blast Radio broadcast, they don't care about the specs. They don't care that it's 48 kilohertz. They don't care about like the fact that like it's being streamed losslessly and captured losslessly, et cetera, and that we have like an incredible like analog to digital converter chip on board of our devices, et cetera, et cetera. But what they do know is that like when I put it on, uh, it's an alternative to Spotify or to Sirius XM. Whereas like when I put on Sirius Twitter Spaces, it's never going to be that. You know what I mean? There have been a lot of people who've tried to experiment with like Clubhouse DJing and whatever it is. There is not a universe where I would ever put on a Clubhouse DJ on my speakers during a barbecue. It just would never happen. I would never put on a Twitter space in the background while I'm having dinner with my wife. It's just never going to happen. Now, there's reasons why I would listen to these things. I would absolutely listen to like I'm listening to this. This is very entertaining, very interesting to me because it's pertaining to my industry. That goes back to the lean in concept, right? It's very timely and interesting content. I'm definitely going to lean in and listen to like say my favorite pundit chime in on some news that just broke. That's really interesting and that's good lean in content. I'm willing to sacrifice that experience, like that quality for the timeliness. But I'm definitely not going to put on a Twitter space in the background while I'm like cooking for like half an hour.
This is such a fascinating conversation, Yousef. I'm so glad you came on to share all this with us. What do you see for the future of Blast Radio?
I think that the best way to describe this is that we're still very early innings. I mean, we're a pretty small company. We're just a few guys here in Brooklyn. It took a lot for us to develop these products and then bring them to market, especially during COVID, because it requires us to manufacture these products in China, and it was during a time where we weren't able to even go to China. So it's all very early innings. There's plenty of product to develop from here, and the community is growing, and I mean, full of really, really talented. It's actually pretty humbling to just see like the incredible talent that we've seen come through our platform, both in terms of like pretty known names to people that I've never heard of, but now I'm a huge fan of. I actually have some merch from like some people that I've heard broadcasting and have just gone to their store and bought their T-shirts or whatever it is because it's just been like really cool stuff. So there's a lot. I guess long story short, there's a lot of stuff to expect from like this community and just in terms of the product. I think it's been early innings, and I think that there's definitely like going to be some more devices to come, and I think that we also take a very fundamental approach to the idea of technology here. I think that that word gets thrown around a lot in the industry, but I mean, hats off to our team because like what it took to make these devices. We're talking about devices that are running everything at a low level with no operating system and streaming real-time lossless audio with like incredible efficiency such that you can get an 8-hour broadcast time off of a single charge. That took like a real technological innovation. So we're hoping to bring some of that same energy and that same focus to future features regarding like say co-broadcasting potentially, or some of this call-in experience that we're accustomed to. But in our mind, if we can empower creators to have the same experience as what they expect from their Bluetooth speaker, but give them the ability to broadcast something as high quality as the radio shows that they grew up listening to, I think that is a game changer.
Absolutely is amazing. Thank you so much, Yousef, for your time today.
Thank you both.
That was great. Thank you, Yousef. That was just fascinating. I love when we come across these really cool apps and tools, Suze, and getting the founder over here to discuss it with us and just kind of enlighten us. It makes me want to dig into it even more. Thank you to all of our speakers who came on and shared so much great stuff. And we're available in all of your favorite podcast apps. We're out there, All Things Audio. You can also go to allthingsaudiopodcast.com as well.
You certainly can. And you can catch us here on Twitter and use the hashtag AllThingsAudio, and we'll pick that up throughout the week. So that's it for this week. But thank you so much to everyone that's been here in the space with us and those of you listening. And we'll catch up with you next week.
Bye, everybody.